Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 10 Movie Trilogies. This video is where I state my 10 favorite movie trilogies. So my guidelines for what constitutes a movie trilogy that I'm using in this video is it can be 3 movies a part of a larger franchise. So if there's more than 3 movies, like the Die Hard films, there's 5 of them, I would still count 3 of them as a trilogy as long as the 3 movies run concurrently. For example, I couldn't just pick my 3 favorite Harry Potter movies and call it a trilogy. Each film must run back to back and actually help tell the same story. In which case, I wouldn't really count a lot of these James Bond films as a trilogy, as they just feature the same character. Other than that, they don't really have much to do with each other, whereas the Harry Potter films are fed into the same ultimate story. So that's how I'm defining a film trilogy. So first, let me start by naming a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make my top 10 list, starting with the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Not the best trilogy, but it had its moments. The first one was horrible, the second one was okay, and I'm actually a huge fan of the third one. Next honorable mention is the X-Men Trilogy. Fairly decent run, good solid mutant movies. First 2 were really good, third one was a disaster. And the final honorable mention is the Harry Potter Trilogy, the first 3. Honestly, they're much better than I thought they would be, as it looked really stupid to me at first. The first 2 were okay, and I loved the third one. So now let's get into my top 10, starting with my number 10, the Dark Knight Trilogy. I may get some flack for this because I'm not a huge fan of the Dark Knight Trilogy, and I prefer Christopher Nolan's other movies to these ones, and personally, I feel the film The Dark Knight is highly overrated. That being said, this was still a really interesting take on the Batman franchise and revolutionized comic book movies in general by making them more dark and realistic. The first one is my favorite, a bit silly at times, but it kept me engaged. The second one, I love the Two-Faced Harvey Dent storyline. I wasn't a huge fan of the Joker storyline. I know I'll get a lot of flack for this, but it's true. I'll just have to do a whole nother video just to cover that. And I actually liked the third one better than the second because it got back to some of that more comic book silliness that a comic book movie should have. But overall, this trilogy was the best take on a tired franchise out there and completely revitalized it. Number 9 is the Alien Trilogy. This was a great trilogy that really set the stage for a lot of science fiction horror. I'm not a huge fan of the first Alien film. I think it might have been original at the time it was released, but has since been redone so much over the years. I don't think it ages very well, but still a solid film. I absolutely loved Aliens. Those of you that have watched my top 50 movie series know that this was number 5 on that list, and I personally consider it a masterpiece and by far James Cameron's best film. The third one, however, was a disaster. Sigourney Weaver and David Fincher tried to save it, so parts of it worked, but the studio just ruined it. It became a less interesting rehash of the first film. So as a trilogy, it's pretty good, but it definitely held up by the strength of the second film, which redefined action science fiction, where the trilogy as a whole would have to be my favorite example of a horror trilogy. Number 8 is the Naked Gun Trilogy, the best laugh-out-loud comedy films I can think of. Again, this is another example where the third movie sucked, but the first 2 were really good and will always be my favorite spoof movies of all time. After the 90s, all the spoof movies out there just plain sucked. Let's just get that straight right now. The Scary Movie, Epic Movie, all that stuff, complete garbage. Only Naked Gun managed to pull this off really well. You have Airplane that preceded it, that was really awesome, and Hot Shots that kind of rode off its coattails, which was pretty funny as well. But in my mind, neither can compare to the first 2 Naked Gun movies, which were just one great laugh after another and pulled off so well that no other comedy has managed to capture since. Number 7 is the Matrix Trilogy, which I just did a video about. I love the first two movies, but the third one was total garbage. I didn't like the first one quite as much as most people did, though, as I wouldn't call it one of the greatest films of all time, but it was still a really solid original film with a lot of new ideas, and I think it was a bold decision to turn it into a trilogy. And even though, again, I'm going against popular opinion, I actually prefer the second film to the first. I did a whole video about that. I'll just put a link for that in the description below if you want to hear more. But overall, this trilogy was a great way to combine a thinking man's philosophical movie with well done, special effects driven action sequences that I think blends the two very well. Even though this trilogy had a horrible ending, I felt overall it was very unique, and there's few film trilogies that pull it off as well as this one did. Number 6 is the Die Hard Trilogy. Die Hard is indisputably one of the best action movies of all time, and you'd think a franchise would be that good, but it actually managed to build off the success pretty well. The first Die Hard was an amazing film about a hostage situation in the building, and every hostage situation movie about one lone man fighting the hostage takers since has been referred to as Die Hard on whatever location they're in. Like Under Siege was Die Hard on the boat, Passenger 57 was Die Hard on the plane, Air Force One was Die Hard with the president. There was even an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Starship Mine, which was Die Hard on a starship. And the second one was okay. Definitely not as good as the first, and it tried too much to be like the first one. But the third one, Die Hard with a Vengeance, was another top-notch action movie in its own right that went its own way, telling a truly engaging, action-packed story. Samuel L. Jackson was awesome in that movie, making this trilogy definitely one that's worth watching. Number 5 is the Predator Trilogy. Now, someone might try to argue I'm breaking my own rules here by going from Predator 2 to Predators, saying that I'm skipping over the Alien vs. Predator movies. However, I consider those films as a part of a different franchise. They don't really exist in the same continuity as these three Predator films, and that's the way I see it, and this is my video, so I'll do as I damn well please. Anyway, this is another franchise I've done a video about. I'll put a link in the description below for that video as well, where I said I feel the second film was better than the first, but they're both top-notch quality films. And Predators, while it may not have been as good as the first two, is still a decent movie, which is why this is higher on my list than some of the other trilogies that have better films in them, like Aliens and Matrix, because all three films in this trilogy are pretty good. Each film I felt pushed the franchise further and tried something new rather than just repeating the same thing over again, making this a decent trilogy to watch. Number 4 is the Back to the Future trilogy. This has always been one of my favorite trilogies. This is a great, solid science fiction comedy trilogy. Sure, the first one is definitely more iconic than its sequels, and the sequels were just copying and repeating the same formula of the first film. However, they did expand upon the characters and the stories and made something greater than it was. Plus, to me, the tropes that the sequels did highlighted some and draw attention to some of the great aspects of the first film. The first one is definitely the most well-written and funniest film, and the second one explores the concept of time travel best out of any of the film, as they travel to the future and they, go to an alternate reality. Pretty great. And the third film is my least favorite, as I'm not a huge fan of westerns, but it was still a really enjoyable film to watch. So overall, this is a top-notch quality film trilogy. Number 3 is Star Trek, the Genesis Trilogy, which refers to The Wrath of Khan, The Search for Spock, and The Voyage Home, as these three films happen concurrently and connect more than any other Star Trek films to form a little trilogy within the 6 original Star Trek films. I always found it to be an amazing trilogy that starts off with the best Star Trek film in existence and one of the best science fiction films of all time, The Wrath of Khan, and it ends that ends with the tragic death of Spock, that explored more in the next film, The Search for Spock, which is an underrated thrill ride, showing the lengths Kirk will go to bring his friend back from the dead. And it's topped off with The Voyage Home, a classic 80s comedy in its own right that shows Kirk and crew traveling back in time to the 80s to save humanity and on their way back home to face the music. Each of these three films were amazing films in their own right, and it's what got me into Star Trek in the first place, and is a prime example of how the original series works better as films than it did as TV, as these are the three best Star Trek films in existence, in my humble little opinion. Number 2 is the original Star Wars trilogy. Talk about three great films. This is the original film trilogy that set the standard for all trilogies that came after it. Although, as I covered in another video, I think these films are a bit overhyped and looked at through the lens of nostalgia, as the first one didn't age entirely well, as it comes off as a bit of a one note and overly melodramatic, and the second one was a tad bit slow at times, and the third one just had some aspects that were just plain silly, like the Ewoks. But that doesn't change the fact that this is the only example of an epic space fantasy trilogy in existence, and it literally defined cinema for decades to come. And there's so much great things about this trilogy. It's so exciting. It's one of the best examples of an action adventure regardless of the setting, and this trilogy still holds up with every viewing. I must have seen it like over 100 times by now, and it never gets old. And my number 1 film trilogy is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Some may find it a bit controversial that I placed this above Star Wars. However, although Star Wars did it first, I believe Lord of the Rings did it best, with 3 absolutely amazing films, each one just as top-notch as the other. Although The Two Towers is my least favorite of the 3, it's still an amazing film in its own right. I mean, that Gollum stuff alone was just amazing. These films not only have amazing action sequences and tell one story that follows an epic quest to defeat evil, but it also has amazing fleshed out and interesting characters, great dialogue scenes, and awesome story arcs, combined with amazing performances and the best modern technology had to offer in terms of special effects. And contrary to the popular belief, I did not feel that these films were too long. In fact, I prefer the extended versions of these films and only watch those again rather than the theatrical release, especially the third film, whose 4.5-hour runtime is a must. In fact, I heard about more scenes that were cut for that film that I wish were still in there, so I wish this film was even longer, because it was just so amazing. Each scene was so well written and contributes to the whole, and in my humble opinion, Peter Jackson took what was fairly flat characters and breathed life into them, and the result is a film trilogy that is as perfect as any film trilogy could possibly be. So that's it for my top 10 favorite film trilogies. Be sure to check out my channel for many other film reviews, including a top 50 favorite movies series that I did. And be sure to subscribe for more videos to come. And thanks a lot for watching.